Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Overview and Scrutiny Commission meeting. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to the meeting and take the opportunity to remind everyone I expect you to treat all members of the committee with respect and to accord this same respect to officers present. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Merton Council YouTube channel. So welcome to everybody watching online. And we will start with item 1, apologies for absence. I've had apologies from Councillor Usama Kawisa, and we've got Councillor Martin Walton standing in as substitute for him, and Councillor Paul Kohler can't be with us tonight, but Councillor John Oliver has stepped in as substitute. Thank you. Are there any other apologies we've received? Okay, thank you. Item 2, declarations of pecuniary interest.
I don't have a pecuniary interest, so it's a non-pecuniary interest, but as the chair of Chas, I will not be voting on the last item.
Thank you, Councillor Brunt. Okay, any others? No. Okay, item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Now, I did receive an email within a very short about an hour of tonight's meeting. I'll just ask before I go on to that, if anyone else has any queries? No? Yes, I'm going to just go through those quick. Okay, I've received an email, sorry, let me just find it and close that down, from Councillor Kohler tonight on page 2, the first paragraph. A question, now this does mention the leader, Councillor Garrett, who I think will be joining us at some stage this evening, confirming a blueprint would be circulated within 12 months and his time frame should be included in the minutes. Now, Councillor Garrett isn't here. I think the intention is to do that, if I'm right. Yeah, it will be. On page 2, the second paragraph, this is to do with Councillor Kohler, and it's in connection with the covenants at the All England Lawn Tennis Club. And this was a conversation that took part between Councillor Kohler and the leader, Councillor Garrett. I know Councillor Christie was here present and Louise Round from legal. I think the reason it wasn't put in is it was Councillor Kohler was trying to make a point about the covenants and Councillor Garrett was being quite right in he didn't understand. Let me rephrase that. He didn't want to cause a problem for any future planning application. Now, whilst the covenants may not take a part, I think that the leader, Councillor Garrett, had the right intention, did not want to say anything. And I think the reason they've been left off is because I don't think there was a need really to necessarily put it in. But I think we've noted it tonight.
I think Paul would take a different view to that.
Well, he may well do, but I think, you know, these are covenants. It wasn't anything.
The point he was trying to make was that covenants are not a matter for the planning committee.
That's right.
And so therefore, it wasn't necessary, although perhaps he was being overcautious, for the leader of the council to refuse to talk about it because it wasn't actually a planning issue. And I think Paul would
I think we can mention he raised the issue.
Well, and also just to clarify, the covenants are not a planning issue. Covenants are a contractual issue.
Thank you, Councillor Oliver. I think we can put a mention about he raised the issue of covenants and maybe we will put something in. I think we can amend that. Although if we're going to amend the minutes, do we have to have a vote on that? We will. Okay, we'll come. Well, in fact, before we go on, can we have a vote? Those in favour of amending the minutes to include the covenant? Oh, actually, sorry, I think Louise just wants a word. Louise?
I think if someone wants to submit an amendment to the minutes, they need to move and second that amendment to the minutes. And if it's not moved and second, then you need to just put the minutes to the vote as they stand.
Thank you for clarification. Councillor Oliver.
Paul has suggested some wording in the email to you and to us. So if the solution to it is to read that out and ask that that be accepted as part of the minutes, then maybe we could do that.
Councillor
I
Wells.
mean, I just obviously raised concerns about inserting verbatim things into minutes. You know, I've sat on this council for 20 years and I've never had this kind of thing before in all the time and the many, many committees I've sat in. It's obviously the minutes are about the accuracy of the meeting. If we don't believe that these minutes are inaccurate, then they can be raised. It shouldn't be for councillors to put their own subjects within a minutes of the meeting. And I don't think we should be. It's for the professional officers to write the minutes. If there is incorrect things in minutes, it should be raised in the proper process, but it shouldn't be for councillors to start dictating what the minutes of the meeting should be for council meetings.
Louise.
As a matter of order, I don't disagree with that, but if there were councillors who are members of this body who think the minutes are incorrect and want to submit a correction, that has to be by way of a motion to correct in the following form, which has to be seconded and put to the vote, and then members that share your view, Councillor Welton, would possibly vote that motion down.
I think the issue we have here is, you know, they're good points raised by Councillor Wilson, and thank you, Louise. But, you know, getting that email an hour and a half before the meeting is probably pushing it a bit. We should have, if it was going to be formally amended, I think we need to have a motion and a second.
Yeah, Chair, I also I have to agree with Councillor Welton and yourself. In actual fact, you know, if Councillor Kohler were here, then it would be fine to take his discussion on this point. But someone is making an interpretation here, and I don't find that acceptable.
Louise?
So that's the reason for putting it to the vote, that Councillor Rolliver will put it to the vote if he has a seconder, and if you don't agree with it, you won't agree it, and then it won't pass, and the minutes will stand as currently drafted.
In essence, as I recall, there was a point made by Councillor Kohler. It was disagreed with by another member, and as long as the essence of that is mentioned, there's no point. What seems to be going on is to try and extend that debate and actually insert the argument more, whereas actually the minute should say this was said and this was disagreed with. We didn't vote on it on the time, and there was no vote taken. So to vote on it now gives it more credence than it had in the first place. So I'd be a bit concerned about that. So I think that noting that there was dissent from the view is all that there needs to be. If we add any more, then we're extending the debate without an opportunity to respond, and particularly without the person who's proposing it being here to propose it, and without the leader of the council here to say why he said what he said. So I think that we just note that there was a difference.
It doesn't say that though, does it?
Sorry?
It doesn't say that, does it?
Well, I'm looking to Rosie as the to say can that be inserted with, does that need to be an amendment? Is that just if normally points, if there was a minute to a meeting which someone's name was missed off, we wouldn't be voting on whether that person's name's added.
Right. So what you're saying is we can make a small adjustment to suggest that there was a discussion about this, which was not resolved in the meeting, and we can insert that without a vote.
I'm new to being vice chair of overview and scrutiny, so I'll be advised by our officers that are here, but that's in essence.
That would be
Sorry,
acceptable.
Chair, I think the options are either the meeting is agreeable to an insertion, or it's not agreeable to an insertion, and if it's not agreeable to dealing with it informally, then it needs to be put formally and voted on. But so either we can agree whatever the wording is because you're happy with it, or if you're not happy with it, it needs to be put to the meeting and the meeting says it's not happy with it formally, and then we move on.
Well, I've just had it pointed out, and Rosie's brought it to my attention. It is mentioned there. I think we're just trying to make something bigger out of it now. And I think we've spent quite a long time discussing it. So certainly anybody online will have picked up the fact it was mentioned. I think we're all aware of it. And let's move on to his last point he makes about the redacted minutes to be found. And that's regarding another item further down, Chaz, which those documents are redacted. They are available to councillors on this panel, but it's a very select, they're not open to all councillors. There have been some issues. They are available to Councillor Kohler currently as a hard copy. There have been some difficulties with the software, Modern Government, but they will be made available. And that goes to anybody on here that can't access them. Okay. Right. So can I have it that the minutes are agreed? Now we've discussed all those items. Yes, agreed. Thank you. Okay. Item 4. Tonight we have our Borough Commander, Chief Superintendent Liz Chappell with us. Chief Superintendent, would you like to give us an overview? And well, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening to people present and good evening to those online. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Liz Chappell. I look after 4 boroughs in southwest London, including Merton, and I've held that role for the last 2 years, taking over from Sally Benatar, who some of you may have known. So I have been to this committee a number of times before. And it's sometimes dealt with slightly differently. So I'll, if okay with you, Chair, I'll make a very brief opening statement, and then I'll ask whether you want me to go through the questions submitted in advance or whether they can be taken as read. So in terms of an opening statement, I just want to just put on record my thanks to the people in this room and to other partners for the incredible and compassionate partnership work over the very sad incident that occurred in Galpins Road. It's been a time of significant difficulty for the families involved, and I know a lot of the officers and members in the room as well have given a lot of personal time to this issue. So we continue to pursue our investigation on that matter, and I'm happy to answer questions on that, or you may prefer to defer those to Hannah Doody or the leader of the council, who I've been in dialogue with. So we in the Metropolitan Police have had a challenging time, and we're now formally in special measures, as are a number of other forces nationally. And again, very happy to answer questions on that. And I'm in regular dialogue with the chief executives, including Hannah Doody, about our plans and how we'll be dealing with that. We have a new commissioner, as you'll know, Sir Mark Rowley, who starts on Monday. He will be doing some press to set out what he hopes to achieve in his 100-day plan. And I can tell you, which I think is very important, that it does heavily prioritise neighbourhood policing, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do. And I think the communities here will really welcome that. From a local Merton perspective, we've already started investing a lot more in neighbourhoods and partnership and prevention work, and that will continue. I do think with the fact that resources are always challenged in policing, and I don't see there being significant change with that, one of the best options and the option that works best for communities is to reduce crime. That's clear. That should be the key role of the police, is to reduce crime. And although it's very important to focus on violence, and it's right that we continue to focus on violence, I also want to make sure that communities know we're focusing too on neighbourhood crimes that are affecting them as they go about their daily business. So what I have been working on in the last 2 years is it's almost a vanity project, but I think it's really important. So I want to lead the 4 safest boroughs in London. And I'm blessed in Richmond and Kingston, which have historically low crime rates. So I just need to maintain that status quo. And together with community safety team partners, last year, for the first time in 10 years, Merton was the 3rd safest borough in London. And we are challenged in that this year with some of the figures that we've had. But again, we'll try and make a strong end to the year to try and maintain that position. So I think that's all I wanted to say in terms of an opening statement, and I'm very happy to either go through the questions or answer any others. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I open up the floor to questions? Councillor Oliver.
Thank you for that introduction. I wonder if you could just explain to me a little bit about the numbers. The graph here, for example, total burglary offences. Have you got that? What do the numbers relate? Are they like per unit of population, or what do the numbers actually mean?
So they are absolute crime numbers.
So are we saying that the average for the Metropolitan Police, is that average per borough?
Yes.
Okay. And the average per borough in your area is that number?
Yes.
And Merton's number is
Yes.
that? Okay.
So if I could just add some context on burglary. So Merton, as I say, is such a safe borough compared to many others in London. However, and I have made sure that we're being completely transparent about this in this slide, although in other boroughs, we've seen some really good, significant reductions in burglary, it's not yet the case for Merton. I want it very much to be the case, and therefore we're doing a lot of additional work, working with communities to try and prevent that crime from happening in terms of giving advice around making homes safer.
Because the trend is a bit alarming, isn't it? As the Wimbledon figure is rising towards the reducing southwestern figure.
Yes, and it's actually not a uniform picture across Merton. There are some areas where there is a decrease in burglary. So we're looking to see what we can learn from those areas. Of course, it's not just the neighbourhood resource who are being applied to this. It's also our investigations resource, because with a crime like burglary, we often find that it's a few individuals who are the perpetrators of this crime. And by putting more work around them as individuals, that is very helpful.
Okay. And just the other quick question, if I may, is just on the total robbery offences thing. It's just quite noticeable that from February this year is when things start to turn around. Is that to do with COVID?
The figures have got this more historical lower baseline because of COVID, because people simply weren't on the streets. But we have been seeing an increase in violence as people come back to the streets. And I do think that, you know, some of the contextual issues aren't helpful either in terms of rising social inequality following COVID. So it's something that we're very focused on. And we did worry that we might be having an issue with school age robberies, but we've put a lot of resource together with partners around schools to deal with that.
Stuart.
Thanks very much. Just kind of on a similar theme, what John was talking about, in terms of burglaries, what kind of the success rates of actually catching the perpetrators of those? I mean, what sort of chances does resident have when something like that happens of actually seeing a sort of successful resolution, whether that's return of goods or catching the person who committed the crime?
Yeah, that's I'm sure you know this, but that's an extremely astute question. For just to give a little bit of brief context for what I'm going to say. So when we have success essentially in solving a crime, we would refer to it as a sanction detection. And what we do from a performance perspective is we not only look at reducing actual numbers of crime, of course, we also look at how many we're solving across certain crime types, across all crime types, of course, and then with increased focus on certain crime types. And although as an area and as the Metropolitan Police, we are being increasingly successful, and particularly compared to national results, particularly successful on solving certain crimes, domestic abuse being one of those, and obviously that's very important. Burglary is the one that we're particularly challenged on. So I don't have the figures for Merton, but for the entire BCU, we are only solving 4.2% of burglaries at the moment. You know, it's not good at all. It's in fact, in terms of how we compare on performance across London, we're actually average or above average on the solving of every single crime type apart from burglary. I can point to one of the reasons for that and what we're doing about it, but more work is needed. So one of the reasons is that we have a combined burglary and robbery team, and that's how resources across all BCUs are set up. Now, because of the spike in robbery, naturally, a lot of that combined team's time was applied to solving of robbery, which we are being really successful at, thankfully. and less time was being applied to solving burglary. So as of Monday, we now have split that team. So we have a separate robbery and burglary team. And so I'm really hoping that that will improve. But just to add as a final point on that, as I mentioned up front, across the whole BCU, we do have the highest reductions of burglary in the Met. So most other BCUs are showing a very small reduction or a small gain, but we have overall in the Met the best rates for reducing burglary.
That's quick follow up. Just on that side. Just two very quick questions. You mentioned the robbery solving rate is much higher. It'd be great to know what that number was in comparison. And then just secondly, on that 4.2%, which way is that trending? Is that kind of a number that's gone down over the years, or is that steadily rising up? It'd be good to know if there's kind of improvement or not in that area.
Yeah. So the answer to the first question is roughly around 10%. As you'll appreciate it, this literally changes hourly because it depends how many how many we're able to charge in that particular day. So, and we get, in terms of reporting figures that I get those at least weekly. So I do keep a very close eye on that trend. And some of the violent crimes linked to robbery, we've actually got a much higher solve rate at 25%, depending on how you categorize those results. In terms of the burglary trend, perhaps rather unusually in terms of performance monitoring, the figure has been exactly the same for a significant period of time. And we've tried a number of things. So most of the burglaries get investigated by our response teams initially. So those are the people that answer 999 calls. And they, since the BCU model came in, that category of officer responsible for solving the less complex crimes. So we've put in extra training and extra support and reviews by detectives to try and change it. The number isn't moving, which is why we're now taking the additional measure of splitting that team and putting additional resource in. Because I like you, am extremely unhappy with that figure, and I want that to change. So I hope that the next time I come to this committee, then I'll be able to give you better news.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Excuse me, Martin, can we just take Mansour online? He's had his hand up for a while, then I'll come to you next, okay? Mansour.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chappell. I just need to know, in terms of neighborhood crime, what special action have you got for Martin? Thank you.
So what kind of things are included in neighbourhood crimes? Yeah. So what I mean when I talk about neighbourhood crimes are burglary, are antisocial behaviour and some of the crime that's linked with that, theft of motor vehicles and theft from motor vehicles. Those are some of the key. You can of course include a lot of others in that package, but those are the type of things that I'm hearing from community meetings matter to people most.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin.
Thank you. I'm Martin Walton, Councillor Martin Walton. I'm a councillor for Pollards Hill. Obviously, Galpins Road is within my patch. I'd firstly like to take this opportunity of thanking the police for all their work over the past month in what has been an incredibly difficult issue and continues to be in terms of Pollards Hill. One issue I did want to raise is obviously we had a public meeting last week where there was obviously some concerns expressed from residents in terms of obviously police accessing homes. Obviously, because it's a red zone, it's likely to continue to be a red zone for at least the next month. I don't know whether you would take the opportunity of coming along to one of the meetings in Pollards Hill in order to help build trust with the community, because obviously there was some concerns raised in terms of how those properties were being accessed, and obviously in terms of cameras as well. And I think it would be very helpful for that to happen. I don't know whether you would commit to coming to one of our meetings if your diary permits.
Thank you. So Councillor Ross Garrett wrote to me formally on some of the issues that were raised at that meeting on the 1st of September. And I have this evening, before I've joined this meeting, sent a written response to him. There were issues that came up at the meeting that we weren't aware of in relation to how people's properties had been accessed. I have asked that that letter isn't shared in its entirety with a much wider audience because it contains personal information relating to some of the residents. But certainly the kind of the tenor of what I've said can be shared. In terms of coming and addressing the community, I'm very happy to do that. I understand from Hannah Doody and others that the meetings have been well served so far by Chief Inspector Barry Capper and his team. But if you feel that more is needed, then I'm always happy to do more. And as you say, if my diary allows, I will certainly come. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Rum.
Thank you. I'm going to linger a bit longer on the burglary figures. Just to clarify, does that include theft from doorstep as well? So, because I know in my ward I've had reports of sort of deliveries from Amazon, Hermes and the like being stolen from doorsteps. Would that be included in there?
It's one of those "it depends" answers.
If reported, that is, yeah.
Yes, it can. It will either be included there or is theft, depending on what the circumstances are.
Right.
I'm aware that that's a new type of crime as well, and actually, this is why we're welcoming from residency and the increase in Ring doorbells, which are really helpful in this regard. And we would only ask, I think, from a policing perspective, that sometimes that kind of information is shared on social media and networking sites between residents and not actually reported to the police. We would ask that it is reported to the police so we can build up a pattern of the areas that are being most affected.
I think, well, to follow up on that, I think that would be useful to have that information so councillors can report to their residents if there's a trend in their area. And one or two long straight roads in my ward I know are vulnerable to it because people cycle up and down, and then when they see it's there for a while, pick it up and the roads are closed off, so cars can't follow them, but cyclists can get out quite easily with a pair of trainers and the like. So that's one aspect. There was there used to be an offer, I wonder if it's still there, for councillors to do a drive round with officers, and I found it very useful to spend half a day in a squad car, on the understanding that if anything serious happens, you'd be dumped wherever you are and have to have a bus fare home. But I think it was really useful, and I think that would be good if it's still, that offer is there, then it's promoted to, particularly to new councillors and any councillor that's not done it in the past. But I think it gives an insight into the sort of things that officers are faced with on a day-to-day basis. My last question is about the pairing still. When the BCU was first set up, I know Richmond and Kingston were paired and Wandsworth and Merton were paired. Is that still the way it's working as a pairing in terms of the cars moving round? Do they focus in those two pairs of boroughs?
Yes. So let me just take your comment essentially, and then your question in turn. So the first point you referred to is our ride along scheme.
Ride along scheme, yeah.
Yes. So if you go to the Met website and type in ride along, there's a short application form, very short to fill in, and that can be arranged. We will promote that, and if anybody has any difficulties with receiving a response from that, then please let me know, because the scheme's very much still in operation. And as you say, everybody that comes on it, I think it changes their life, really. It's very eye-opening, isn't it?
Yes.
Just the range of things that you see. So thank you. That's a very good prompt to talk about that more. With regard to the pairing question, so it's a kind of a yes and no answer. So we have the BCUs divided into two from a response policing perspective. So we have two response bases, which is where the cars that answer the 999 calls come out from. So one of those is in Twickenham and the other one is in Wimbledon. So Wimbledon would serve Merton and Wandsworth, and Twickenham, Kingston and Richmond. However, the other resources in the BCU, excepting neighbourhoods, work across the BCU. So our public protection teams, our local investigations teams, all of our specialist capabilities work across the 4.
Right, okay, thank you.
Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Commander, help me understand something. I live next to Cricket Green Police Station, or the police station at Cricket Green in Mitcham. It's a marvellous police station, which apparently has been under threat of closure for more years than I've lived there, apparently. And one of the most common grassroots complaints that I receive, especially on my housing estates in my ward, is that we used to have bobbies on the streets. We don't see them. They don't do walk rounds. We haven't seen them on our estates for years, and no one comes round because we've been fighting the problem with kids smoking drugs outside our flats. It's got worse and worse and worse. Now, I know that is a problem. And in particular in Mitcham, we have a myriad of little strange little lanes and back alleys. It's a very strange little part of the world, but a lot goes on. How am I going to be able to assure my beautiful residents in my ward that, number one, we're going to have a police station that is operational for at least a few more years, that it will be staffed in order to start getting our lovely bobbies out on the beat? Thanks.
Thank you for those questions. There's a lot there. So let me try and take the different elements of that, and do let me know if I've missed anything out. Right. So actually, every time I'm here, I'm asked a question about the estate. And I will have to, unfortunately, give you the same answer, which is that it's a MOPAC function to decide what our estate looks like, essentially. So they ask us what we would like, and then they look at affordability and so on. We would like to keep all of the stations that we have. We were willing to lose a few of the very small bases, but that was it. So our proposal was sent in some significant time ago, and to date we've not had a response, which in some ways is good, because whilst there's no response, we retain the stations. I think there's a piece of work that's ongoing to understand what the increase in officer numbers looks like in terms of space needed. But I would like, and I think it's very important that we're as close to the community as possible. So I would very much like that to continue. I do understand why we're not perhaps able to retain all stations, just because the sheer cost of them is runs into the multi-millions to refurbish, and we simply don't have that kind of capital or revenue. So do keep asking me about that, and I do keep raising it. And if you get the opportunity to raise it with MOPAC, then do. In terms of not seeing an officer, that is, as you'll know, something that is said. We have not had a reduction in neighbourhood officers for some years now. Not since the BCE was created. There was a reduction of, I think, about 10 years ago. So we have still 2 dedicated ward officers for each ward, and supervisors. I think it's right to say that they have a wider spread of duties now, which does sometimes take them away, but that's something I'm fighting very hard to reduce. I don't know how effective the ward panel is in your area, but I hope that there would be an engagement opportunity through that. But anything, I mean, we've been trying to really publicise who the ward officers are and how to contact them. So we'll keep going with that. We put that out in newsletters and on social media very regularly now. So hopefully people will know who their ward officers are. Yeah, so alleys and difficult areas of the borough, we continue to work as a community safety partnership to try and design out crime that's in those areas. I mentioned earlier that I want us to really refocus heavily on antisocial behaviour, and that's something we do frequently talk about in partnership meetings. I would only ask that community members don't lose faith and do keep reporting things, because a very typical conversation that we have is, residents' perception of an issue in a particular area, and yet when we check our own figures, simply they're not there. And I understand on both sides why that happens, but the more intelligence we can get about where we should focus our resources, we absolutely will focus our resources there. Thank you.
Agatha, then Tony.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, and also send my thanks to your officers for all the work they've done and doing in Pollard Hill, because I know a lot of people that live down that area, Galpin Road. You said you've got a new boss, and his 100-day first 100 days, what he wants to do is try and neighborhood policing. It's part of his 100-day ambition, still communications, because MOPAC, I think, and the mayor was all about communicating with the residents. And it started well. I haven't seen it go very far because residents are complaining that, you know, not a lot is going on, they know. So if you can add that to his list and make sure they actually let residents and the community know what's happening, that would be nice to have that with a 100-day list to do with you know, neighborhood policing. Yeah.
Thank you. So I haven't seen the detail of the 100-day plan. We have a meeting with the new commissioner on Monday on his first day. I'm expecting to get more detail then, and I'm very happy to pass things on. And as I say, I think things will be talked about in the press as well. Communication is a perennial and hugely important issue, isn't it? We are trying to do a number of things on that locally, because what you're saying is absolutely borne out by the evidence. So if you look at the detail of the public attitude survey that comes out on a regular basis, which MOPAC commission, then people are saying that they don't feel they're informed about what's happening in their local area. So we are trying to mitigate that locally. So we have newsletters. We're hoping to get, and we're more successful in some areas, and there's, you know, networks of residents either through Neighbourhood Watch or through ward panels. So we have those communication mechanisms with people. We're hoping to make better use of volunteers to deliver hard copy newsletters to people who just simply don't use social media and other mechanisms. So I would hope it's in there. And when I see the new commission, I will mention it.
To say that if the more communication, the more information people get, the easier it is to counteract rumors that aren't. Because sometimes people fear a lot because of what other people are saying. And I'm not saying things don't happen, they do. But when you look into it, you know, it's not there, as you said.
Yeah.
So the more they get the right information.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And we try and do our best in terms of Facebook and Twitter, but I think we can always do more, because if we can articulate our own perspective on what's happened and use this kind of more rationale-based communication method, I think that would be better for everybody, because I want us to be as transparent as absolutely possible and bring the community with us. So I couldn't agree more.
Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Could I move on to look for some clarification really on the violence against women and girls in Merton? I may have wrongly assumed that a lot of that might be domestic violence, but the detection rates seem surprisingly low. So I was wondering if you could clarify what the situation is and what we might be able to do better on that.
Yes, so I think following my session, we'll be coming on to a more detailed session on this. So
Oh, I see.
yeah, so you may want to
Okay.
postpone your question to
Okay, happy to
then,
do that then. So,
because it does involve an absolute myriad of things from,
right.
as you say, things in domestic settings, and also, which has obviously been a very important recent topic in terms of how safe women feel on the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Nick.
Thank you, Borough Commander. Firstly, I'd just like to come back to Councillor Manley. So Nick McLean, Councillor for Cannon Hill. Councillor Manley's comments. I'm sad to hear that she's not having the same sort of experience with her SNT team as I certainly have in Cannon Hill. I'd argue that I've probably got the best in PC Robin Young and PCO Sandra Wood. So yeah, look, I'm so pleased to hear that the Commissioner is going to be focusing on Neighbourhood Watch, because I do believe that is the way that with that intelligence that we can get on top of those issues. And of course, I'm going to give my team another plug, because of course we are the first ward in Merton to have 100% coverage on the neighbourhood watch, and I would like to have that on record because Sandra and Robin have done a really, really great job. I wonder if you could just give a quick overview of where we are on staffing at the moment and places. Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. Let me just turn to my note for that. So again, this changes daily. This update that I have from the team is the 26th of August. We have pretty good coverage. I'm pretty pleased with it in terms of the rate of turnover that we have. So we have some wards with vacancies. So we have Abbey has 1 PC rather than 2 PCs. Cricket Green, it's happy news because the PCSO is leaving to become a PC. So that's great from a development perspective. But we do have a difficulty at the moment in recruiting PCSOs because our PCSO to PC scheme has been so successful. We're not getting staff in quick enough, so that is a gap. Ravensbury, 1 PC has moved to Merton Park, so there's a vacancy there. The village has 1 PC instead of 2, and in that case, and one of the others, it's because that dedicated ward officer is acting as a supervisor at the moment. So again, it's good development for those people, but does take them away. And again, with Merton Park, there's a PCSO who's moving on. So when everything's taken together, 3 dedicated ward officers under strength, and 2 PCSOs under strength compared to, we have an actual figure of 18. And we have 6 sergeants, 2 are acting in that role. So it's not a substantive role, and the other 4 are substantive. So it's a fairly good picture. I'm fairly happy with it, but I don't want to be complacent on it.
Just ask for a bit of clarity on following on from Councillor McLean's question. I assume that you've reorganised your structure to fit with the borough's new ward boundaries. So Wandle Ward, for example, has 2, does it already?
Yeah, so we were actually the first BCU in London to move to the new structure because we think it's right that everybody's represented. We wanted to get the new ward panels up and running straight away. The only difficulty I have for utter transparency is that some of our systems and processes haven't followed suit quite as quickly, and that presents challenges for the officers in terms of the figures they put together.
We've heard about anxieties where there isn't sort of visible neighbourhood police officers for people to become familiar with. And I think nobody would disagree that it's really important when children are growing up and those years of teenagers in schools, that there is regular contact that is non-confrontational contact, and they get to know one another and they can talk freely. I do not suggest that I have the evidence that this has been a concern in Merton, but I do know of other places where schools are telling me, well, you know, we had somebody brilliant, now we don't have anybody. We had somebody brilliant, they're now off on mental health issues and not being replaced. I think I am talking probably still within the Borough Command area. Can you give us any reassurance that all our schools in Merton do have that regular contact from a police officer, that they're able to build up that rapport, both staff and students, please?
So I don't have the figures with me for the Safer Schools officers that we've got, but I believe there to be a very small number of vacancies. So there are officers allocated to schools. I do get contact from head teachers from time to time who are rightly aggrieved when officers that do cover their school are needed for other duties, for example, public order duties. And I'm trying to restrict that as much as possible by making sure they're allocated to those duties after officers from other categories. We do also run quite a lot of different sporting based activities and mentoring based activities with young people. lots of our officers use their own kind of time and discretionary effort to run, football schemes and mentoring schemes and things like that. So the Safer Schools officers are not the only point of contact with young people, which is great. Two areas that I would like us to focus on. We're not given resources for primary school allocations. But I would like to find a way, it won't happen quickly, but I'd like to find a way in due course of having better links with primary schools, because I think that year 5, year 6 age is really crucial. And the other thing is quite a lot of our schools officers, it's come to my attention that they're very individual focused, they're very young person focused, and they'll deal with a particular incident or a particular child. I want them to become more rounded contributors to schools and be better informed on some crimes that perhaps are happening online, and also violence against women and girls, and some of these more topical issues that I think they could play a hand in alongside others to help our young people grow up into successful adults.
Thank you. Any more questions, or can I get, well, Councillor Christie, welcome.
Hey. Yeah, apologies for my lateness, Chair. Double broken. Just the thing that strikes me about, I'm from Graveney, and we seem to have a good set of coppers, I can call them now. And they do regular meetings with us, organised by Linda and the council team. But they don't seem to be tagged into the schools in our area. Do you understand what I mean? Like, so they go around the area on the bikes and all that, right? And they address the community when we host a meeting, but I don't get any sense that they're tagged into the schools in our ward, if I can put it that way. And so, what's the schedule for officers going into schools, particularly primary schools, as you mentioned? Thank you.
I think there's a couple of points there. So typically, so our neighbourhood officers, our dedicated ward officers are different officers to our Safer School officers. So from the comments being made, it seems likely that there's a job for me to do to make sure that those two teams are working together more closely. The schedules of kind of interventions and meetings with schools are agreed with the schools, because it depends on what else is happening in their PSHE curriculum, for example. And as I mentioned, our resources for primary schools are fairly limited, and that's something I do want to improve. So I'll take away the communication point for those teams.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to clarify, they're not lined up then?
They're lined up in the sense that they're part of the same larger team.
Yeah.
But perhaps from what you're saying, they could do with talking to each other more regularly about some of the detail.
Yeah, so my point is, it'd be nice if the police we see in our community wandering around were connected to like the Gorringe Park, which is our local primary. Just seems a bit odd that you've got two another in the overall, but they're not linked, if you know what I mean. They're not, like you would imagine the children would see the same police officer at school that they saw in their community. It's just a thing that I think needs not fixing, but if it can be aligned, it'd be a lot better. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the best solution we've got is for them to work more closely together. So our Safer Schools officers receive an enhanced suite of training, which makes them more suitable for that role. So I think that if they could, the neighbourhood officers and the schools officers for that area work together on that area, that would be the most successful outcome.
I think I can speak from a little bit of experience when there was a Safer Schools officer at Rutlish. I mean, he did work with the Merton Park team, but primarily at the school. But if there was an issue there, if there was an incident in the road, he would step out and deal with it, and it was passed over. So there was a link up there, but I think primarily that's where he was, and it worked quite well. But well, just before I ask my question to you, I think everyone, without echoing other councillors' thoughts, I think it goes without saying that everyone here on the panel and wider members within Merton really appreciate the work that's gone in on Galpins Road by all our emergency services, but we have to thank you as you're representing Metropolitan Police. So it goes without saying, we must record that. And I think the mention that Mike gave, and you mentioned the ride along, for new councillors that haven't done it, it's something I did probably 6 years ago, and I would really recommend it. Actually, it gives you an insight on what a response team does, what happens locally. They don't know what they're going to, and I think it's very useful as a councillor just seeing things from their perspective. So I would definitely say afterwards, get in contact and do that. Now sorry, Stuart.
So I was going to say on that, I just went on to look on the website, and the ride along scheme application, for me at least, the link seems to be broken. So if you're able to look into that, that would be great.
Hopefully that's just a tonight thing.
Yeah.
Listen, so what I'll do is I'll check that link and I'll, assuming it works, which I hope it does, I'll get it sent out with the minutes. If it doesn't work, I'm very sorry, but do come to me directly and I will sort it all out for you. And just as another note to say, I will, I'm aware that I went through the numbers of officers very quickly, so I'll submit that to go out with the minutes, and also I will find out the number of Safer Schools officers and whether there's any vacancies and include that in the minutes as well.
Thank you. I mean, I know I've worked very closely with the Merton Park ward officers, and of course we've lost PC John Weatherhead, that must have been there for at least 10 years, very good officer, and recently PCSO Nigel Sanders, that you would know, two very experienced policemen, or PCSO and PC. That it's left quite a big hole, I must say, and it's our monthly meetings. Because of COVID, we haven't had that continuity, and I know residents, a lot of them don't like the next door facility for this community call-in, and I would think it might be the same with other wards. It is we'll have at least 40 residents like last night or more. It's a good way for them to get in touch with the residents and the other community forums we have. It's good if officers can attend and give out advice, perhaps burglary prevention with the nights drawing in. I know that's not for you, probably something for Katie, but I think it is worth doing the old-fashioned things. It's certainly the older people that don't really appear to be on social media. So I do think it's good to have a presence there. I was just going to ask what you think the main challenges you have. I mean, obviously there's a balance between experienced officers retiring and moving on, and the new ones coming in. It's balancing up that experience. Do you, how are you dealing with that? That's probably been unfair in some ways, but it's not just Merton. That's the Met as a whole, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The experience level that we have in the BCU and in the Met is the lowest that it's been for some time. And it's simply a function of the fact that the recruitment was frozen for a while, and then the uplift came in. So we have happily a lot of new officers in a short time frame. So we have been allocating additional coaches locally to work with officers when they start. There's some work that's been done centrally to reduce the supervision ratios, to make sure that there's one supervisor for 6 new officers or detectives, which we have currently in some parts of the BCU, but by no means all. So we're doing that. And we're just trying to make sure that we balance the experience across the teams. So we've got some absolutely brilliant direct entry detectives who started with us in the last year or so, and they will make great officers, but we're not there yet. So in our investigation strand, only 37% of our officers there are experienced. So it's a lot to deal with.
Thank you. Yeah, I've met a couple of those direct entry candidates, and the enthusiasm is there. So I hope they last the course. I've been impressed so far. Right, if there aren't any other questions for the chief. John.
Question, I just forgot to big up my fixed marsh team. I think they work very hard. They've got a real job on their hands, but they're very good. I see them very often. So just tell them this.
Thank you.
It's just a little question. Stuart Neverson's earlier question, you said 4.2% of crimes, burglaries, I think, was solved. I just wanted to clarify whether that is the same thing as getting a conviction.
It's quite a technical answer, but broadly, yes. in terms of the burglaries, because they're quite straightforward. It's not necessarily the case with more complex crimes where there's a lot more attrition later and involve a jury because they go to Crown Court, for example.
Yeah, because I noticed in question 8, your answer talks about locating the culprit, which is kind of a bit of a vague phrase.
Yes, so it's difficult, isn't it? I was trying to put it in understandable language, and obviously I failed. So I'll make a note to kind of give you the technical definition so you can understand how we step through that, and I'll get that sent over to be included in the minutes.
That would be interesting. Thank you.
Okay, well, that concludes questions from members of this panel. Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent Chubb.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Item 5, Safer Merton, and we've got Katie Saunders. Over to you, Katie. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. This item gives an update on the work on the Violence Against Women and Girls agenda and the new VORG strategy, which will cover 2022 to 25. VORG is a strategic priority for the Community Safety Partnership, and via our domestic abuse and VORG lead, Zoe Gallen, we coordinate a partnership approach to respond to VORG. This includes working with a wide range of council departments, police and other agencies to prevent violence against women and girls in Merton.
Evening all. So detailed in this report, some of the work that we cover is commissioning the IDVA service, which is currently run by Victim Support. We run a weekly one-stop shop drop-in service at Malden Baptist Church. That's also commissioned, and Victim Support run that. And we do some joint commissioning work with our other BCU areas, Kingston, Richmond and Wandsworth. And we've got a complex needs IDVA service that runs across the 4 boroughs. And we also, as a council, commission our refuge provision. So we've got 17 beds for women that are fleeing domestic abuse, not necessarily live in Merton, but they kind of come to Merton as a flea.
Other work coordinated by Safer Merton includes coordinating Merton's VORG strategy and action plan, managing the VORG board, running the 3 weekly DV Marek meetings, coordinating campaigns to raise awareness of DVA and VORG amongst our partners in the community. For example, the 16 Days Against Domestic Violence and Abuse campaign, which runs each winter, and responsibility for conducting domestic homicide reviews, which are a multi-agency review of the circumstances in which the death of a person aged 16 or over has resulted from violence by a person to whom they were related in an intimate relationship with, or from a member of the same household as themselves.
And the new strategy that we're presenting this evening has been developed in conjunction with our partners and our Violence Against Women and Girls Board. The strategy sets out our vision for ending violence against women and girls in Merton, and it covers 5 priorities. So raising awareness, implementing a coordinated partnership working approach, preventing VORG through early intervention, support for victims, holding perpetrators to account, and improving the safety of women and girls. And as you'll know, this has been a focus since end of last year with a number of high-profile murders. We've had Sarah Everard, Nicole Smallwood, and Bibba Henry, and Sabina Nessa. And we set up a specific task group around women and girls safety, and a lot of that work has kind of been influenced and put into our strategy, and we'll carry on. So I think that covers my bit.
Yeah. So on the report provided, we've also given a summary of other key pieces of work going on, which will support the implementation of the new VORG strategy. This work includes beginning within Merton Council to obtain White Ribbon accreditation, which will demonstrate our commitment engaging with men and boys to end violence against women and girls. We are currently working to recruit White Ribbon ambassadors to help lead on this work. We aim to launch the new strategy in November during the 16 Days Against Domestic Violence and Abuse campaign. And during this year's campaign, we plan to link in with a local partner, AFC Wimbledon, to send a clear message that men and boys in Merton want to be part of the change to promote equality and respect of women and girls and encourage the harassment of women to be called out. So we'll now invite further questions from the Commission.
Thank you. Members, any questions from the chamber? Agatha.
Nice to see you all. Can you just tell me how the task group is going and what's happening? I mean, I know you just went over, but where are we at and when's the launch and how are we progressing? Okay.
So we had the task group. It's having a summer break at the moment, I think like most did. And while the strategy is kind of coming through the process, once it comes out the end, the task group is going to kind of emerge together and look at what the actions will be for the action plan going forward. So the VORG board obviously leads that work, but then we'll have the task group feeding into it, as well as our VORG practitioners as well. So it will be reinstated as we go through the process with the strategy.
Tony.
Yes, I'll come back to my question now. Seems to be a better time. So the link between the violence against women and girls and domestic violence and the low rate of conviction of sorting those, solving those, dealing with them, that's a puzzle to me. I don't understand why they're so low. I don't know who's the best person to answer that.
I can do the first bit. So just from my kind of knowledge and my skill set, with domestic abuse, they're very complex cases, and the investigations can take a really long time, and they can be really complex and have lots of partners involved. So I'm sure Liz will explain that the teams investigating can struggle a little sometimes, just because the cases are so complex, and they are difficult cases to investigate. I think just because of the complexities around victims, what they're going through, are they ready to proceed with an investigation? Is it right to proceed with investigation right now, or do I need to feel safer before I proceed with an investigation? So there are kind of lots of factors involved. So from my side and the services, we will continue to support someone whether they report to the police or not. And we will also support them through that process. And we will work with the officer in charge to improve how we get statements out of victims. Evidence can, be gained for those officers. So from our side, we will continue to support regardless of whether there's a prosecution or not. But I'll let Liz do the sanction detection bit.
Yeah, and we were thinking it might also be useful to cover the categories of offence essentially that's within the plan, because that's partly what you're talking about as well. Do you want to cover that first, and then I'll talk about sanction detections afterwards?
Yeah. Domestic violence would make up the majority of the VORG categories within Merton, but obviously there are other types of VORG such as forced marriages, honour-based violence, FGM, sexual violence. I think in general Zoe would agree, we've got we do see cases of those in Merton, but the figures are quite low. And that's not to say there's not some more work to be done around us encouraging victims to report and get the support they need. But the majority would be domestic violence based.
So when we're looking at violence against women and girls, so obviously it's been articulated what the plan covers in terms of what's being prioritised. Then in terms of crime classification, we focus particularly on certain ones. So domestic violence is one of those. I don't actually have the full figures in front of me, but I believe the sanction detection rate is roughly around 15% at the moment. And rape is another one in the classification, and that is around, it was 6.3 the last time I looked at it. And then the conviction rate for rape, and you'll know this, nationally is extremely low. It's actually less than 1%. And it's, there's a very high attrition rate for those cases as victims, in some cases happily and in some cases less so move on with their lives. And this is obviously going to be, that the kind of attrition in cases is going to be further exacerbated by the barrister strike at the moment, and the need to move more towards Crown Courts of the lower volume-based cases, which then is to the detriment of some of the more serious and complex ones.
Could I ask as a follow-up then, in terms of measures to make this better, what's working and what should we be doing more of?
So we have, from a policing perspective, and there's lots going on a partnership perspective, which the team may come to. From a policing perspective, we have very specialist roles who work with people who are in these very difficult situations. So we have advisors for all of these kind of categories we've talked about in terms of FGM and forced marriage. We also have, sexual offences specifically trained teams who work with victims as soon as an offence has happened to support them and to also capture evidence. And we have independent domestic violence advocates and others within the wider system who provide support as well. We can always do more, but from a personal perspective, I think the fact that everybody's talking about it now is a huge step forward in terms of how we all work together to make this better.
I was going to say, just to follow up on that, I think with the cases we work with, our IDVAs, our independent domestic violence advisors, there's no time stop on how long they work with someone. So we can work with victim survivors that have been experiencing domestic abuse for many years, may not have reported to the police, and it could take us a long time to build that rapport with someone. So sometimes what happens is they will then report a probably recent crime, but they may then report lots of historic crimes as well. But what we will do is work with that person, build that trust, and we will always advocate that crime should be reported to the police, because police have a lot of powers to help support and protect victims. But it is about how we support victims and survivors in turn to report to the police as well. And there's lots of work done, work with some brilliant colleagues from the Community Safety Unit, Public Protection Unit, that investigate the crimes, and our IDVAs will always work with those officers on a one-to-one to get the best evidence and the best statements so that they can kind of follow that investigation through.
Thank you. I noticed in the early part of the report, it refers to the fact that there are 17 beds for women for seeking refuge from domestic violence. Does that include the beds that will be for children as well, or is that 17 women? Because I could imagine that if there was a woman with 1 or 2 children, then that would fill up quite quickly. So my concern would be, are there times when you're under pressure to actually provide safe haven to someone? And how do you manage that? And what can be done to increase the capacity if it's needed?
So that's kind of 17 units, as they call it, which is 17 rooms. Some of the rooms are set up for children, some are set up for single women. And I think what our refuge is very good at, it's Hestia that run our refuge. So if they have a referral come in for a woman and children and they don't have space, they will work with other refuges to see if there's a space. So they may say, we don't have a space for you and 3 children. We've only got a space for you and 1 child. But actually, we're going to talk to some of our colleagues from the other refuges to see whether they've got the space for you and your 3 children. So they do work on a computer system that shares what bed spaces are free at any one time. And Hestia run quite a lot of the refuges across London. So they will work with Hestia colleagues in other refuges.
At a time when it's crisis and there's no space?
I'd say yes, across London. I think refuge spaces have seen a huge demand, as we know, through COVID. And I think if we had more refuge spaces, that would be amazing. But I think we would fill them. But we will work with those victim survivors. And like I say, our refuge manager is very good. And she will say, look, we've got this family, we can't find a space for them. Is there anything we can do? And we will work as a partnership to try and find someone a safe space.
John, just before I let you, your question, just as we're on this subject of refuges, what happens in the case of children at a school? If the children go with the mother into the refuge, obviously that puts a lot of pressure if there is a partner that knows the children are at school. What steps are taken there in terms of education and working together to protect that family, really, the child, children and the mother?
So a lot of that's done with our IDVAs, and that's kind of some of the safety planning. So if someone moves to Merton with their children and they go into school and the address is compromised and they're found, obviously we will work to find them another safe space. But we will work with education welfare within the council, and we will work with schools on a one-to-one as well, so that they know what's happening and they know what's going on and how to keep those children safe kind of coming to and from school. We will, as part of safety planning, look at, is it safe for children to stay at the school they're currently at? Can we work with education welfare to move the children while we're moving mum as well? So we will work really closely. And as part of that, the domestic abuse partnership, they are part of that. So yeah, we will do our best, and we know that schools are the one constant reliable thing where children go all the time. So we know that that can be a risk for people fleeing domestic abuse. So we will look at all the options.
John.
Yeah, I think this is really important. It's like addresses a kind of structural social thing, doesn't it? That violence against women has been ignored or tolerated for a very long time, and it's not acceptable. But to bring one's accountant perspective to this, I find it really difficult just from the little snippets of information here to get an overall picture of what's going on. And I wonder if there is an intention to provide some more detailed data, or perhaps this is just not the place to be looking for it. But will we get to see like the different kinds of things that happen and the percentages and things? Yeah, because for instance, just to point out something that confused me, you might be able to help me with it. 80% of DVA flagged offences are classed as violence against the person, right? Next sentence, the proportion of Merton DV offences which result in physical injury fell to 22.5%. So violence presumably results in physical injury, almost by definition. So how come those numbers are different? And why aren't I understanding this?
I think the violence with injury is an overview of what's happening, because it's violence with injury within the VAUG kind of world. I can provide lots more detailed data, and I can always shape that data for what you want to see. I think we were trying to get kind of just an overview in the strategy rather than bore people with lots and lots of data. But I'm happy to provide more if you wanted to see more going
I think
forward.
just to have something with it that we can look at from a trend perspective, just to see that things are moving in the right direction.
And we have got a specific domestic violence profile as well, produced by our data analysts, and we can share that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Just one more from me. There was a very good initiative run, I think, last year, and I think Liz will know what I'm talking about. There was a running initiative where police officers were running with females on Wimbledon Common around and encouraging them to go out where they didn't necessarily feel safe as lone runners. Are there any plans to encourage that again as we get the darker, longer evenings, to encourage people out again?
So across London, BCUs were being encouraged, boroughs were being encouraged to do walk and talk, and that is ongoing. So you'll see a lot of the wards advertising walk and talks, and this is typically where you have female officers, although not exclusively female officers, agreeing to meet with female members of the public, and typically they would go to areas where women have indicated they feel less safe than others, and then working with the council and others, we look at whether a lighting solution is needed or other things. And you're right, so one of our officers went a step further and did a run and talk. Good luck to them running and talking. Unfortunately, that officer's moved on promotion to the City of London Police, so that was Sarah Dobinson. We do have other runners, so if there is an appetite in this room for running and talking, then I'll make sure we reinvigorate that, but we'll the concept continues.
Right. No, I think let's move on then to item 7. Thank you, Zoe and Katie, for that. Item 7, I beg your pardon, item 6, public space protection orders. And we've got Katie again and Alan on this. Alan.
Good evening. So I'll introduce the public spaces protection orders. So they are one of a range of measures introduced by the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014 to combat antisocial behaviour and its impact on individuals and the communities. A PSPO identifies a public space and prohibits certain activities within that area and/or require certain things to be done by persons engaging in certain activities within that area. PSPOs focus on individual problem behaviours rather than targeting specific individuals or properties. A breach of a PSPO is a criminal offence.
In October 2020, the Council implemented a PSPO to address alcohol-related ASB in the following 5 wards, which were Cricket Green, Figs Marsh, Graveney, Lavender Fields and Ravensbury. It's important to note that this PSPO only applies to ASB-related alcohol consumption. Officers only enforce this prohibition when people drinking alcohol are currently or likely to cause ASB. If an individual is found to be breaching the restrictions, the police or council enforcement officers can request they either stop drinking or surrender the alcohol.
Anyone who does not comply with the request to stop drinking or surrender the alcohol will be issued with a £100 fixed penalty notice. It's important to note that a PSPO is not solely an enforcement tool. It is an opportunity to provide pathways to access support for those whom alcohol has become a challenge. This support is provided by signposting and referrals to the borough's drug and alcohol treatment service provider, WDP, which is Westminster Drugs Project.
Merton's current PSPO expires in October 2022, and from gathering evidence from our partners and the results of the latest public consultation, we believe there is a case to extend the current PSPO for a further 3 years. We also propose that work begins to consult on applying for a borough-wide PSPO in future, and this is with the aim of making Merton a responsible drinking borough. This will help to ensure our public spaces, such as our parks, open spaces and town centres, are places for everyone to enjoy safely. And we'll now invite further questions from the Commission.
Thank you. Stuart.
Thank you. Yeah, just 2 questions. You mentioned on the referrals to units that deal with people who've had issues with alcohol. I was wondering if you have any sort of stats or success stories on what impact that's had locally and who that's been able to help. And the second question was just on what would a borough-wide PSPO look like?
In terms of stats, I'm not in a position to be able to provide any stats with any in terms of referrals to treatment services. What I can tell you is certainly recently we've been encouraging our Kingdom wardens to go out and enforce the PSPO, but in practice that's engagement and offering leaflets and referral services. So we're at that stage at the moment of doing that engagement, leafleting and support, and actually on a few occasions they've seized alcohol and disposed of alcohol. So it has had some effect. But as I say, we're in a position at the moment where we're monitoring the situation, and I can provide you at some point with some more information about whether those referrals are taken up by Westminster Drugs Partnership. You may or may not be aware, but we're in the process of reorganising our tasking process at the moment to look more closely at PSPO enforcement and working together in partnership. And PSPO activity will be featured very much as part of that agenda.
Just on the second question on the borough-wide PSPO, what would that look like as an expansion of the current areas?
So it would all be subject to a consultation exercise anyway, but it's looking at extending the one we're looking at now from the 5 wards across the whole borough of Merton. So it would be applicable to all areas within Merton Borough, and it would be about dealing with people who engage in antisocial behaviour and there's alcohol involved. This is not about individuals who go and sit in the park and have a glass of wine on a Sunday afternoon and behave. It's not about that. It's about having the tools and powers to deal with those that engage in antisocial behaviour. And again, the focus is going to be very much on initially, at least, engagement, diversion, support into treatment services. And then if that doesn't work, then we will resort to the enforcement option, which is the last resort.
John.
Thank you, Chair. As a representative of a ward that's not currently included in the scheme, is there the idea of likely to cause antisocial behaviour injects a degree of subjectivity into this. And I wonder if there's any kind of cultural bias, or if the experience so far has been that some people enjoy themselves in different ways to others and might therefore be thought to be about to cause an ASB, but actually that's just they're a bit more raucous than other people and they're not really meaning any harm.
We acknowledge that. We acknowledge that some communities, perhaps their culture is more that they do drink outside rather than inside in a pub. So it's around the officers using, having that local knowledge and using that discretion to the fact that, like you said, not everybody is going to cause antisocial behaviour, but it's having, monitoring that situation and only sort of intervening when it does get to the stage where it is causing alarm and distress to other residents.
Okay, so just to finish that point, so can you reassure me then that the experience to date is that that hasn't been an issue?
To date, I'm not aware of any issues arising from the use of the power under the PSPO. I'm aware that officers, and these are Kingdom wardens, have been out engaging with residents and issuing leaflets, and I'm not aware of any issues that have arisen as a result of that. Indeed, we've had complaints from residents about antisocial behaviour, street drinking, and they want something done about it. And that's our response to that, is to deploy officers into those areas to help that. Obviously, these powers are available to police officers as well. And I'm aware that there have been instances where police officers have also engaged with people, street drinkers, engaging in antisocial behaviour, and others that are involved in alcohol-related antisocial behaviour, and they've used their own powers to deal with it. But those powers under the PSPO are also available to police. But it's really about the prevention, the advertising, the signage, all of those things, together with the engagement opportunities and the diversion support. And as I said, it's right at the very end, the last resort is the enforcement.
Was it found to have any positive impact on teenagers and underage drinkers, for example, in that there was less modelling of drinking outside and in the streets and so on that they aspired to? Any sort of evidence of impact on young people, positive or perhaps even negative? I suppose the corollary is it could drive something more undercover amongst them, but it does seem to me to be a worry when young people are aspiring to be like some of the other behaviours and so on that they might see out and about.
We don't have any direct evidence of that, but I suppose this goes towards the notion of making Merton responsible drinking borough, and that we'd have that culture promoted, that we'd have a safe and sensible nighttime economy. It's not about trying to reduce the nighttime economy. We want to encourage that, but in a safe and sensible and social way, and that will model hopefully on the younger people as well.
Liz.
And I would just add that there's a suite of other things that we're doing to help support young people's positive development. So working again with partners, licensing teams do visits to premises who might be selling to underage drinkers. And also we use our cadets. We have some great cadets, and they work with us to do test purchase operations. So it's trying to get the whole community to take responsibility for these issues as well.
I have to say, I have got some experience of this, not myself, but it's a relief in the chamber. Some of the young men that I coached at rugby were stopped, and it was pointed out, and it was handled very well by police officers actually, who pointed out, were they aware? They weren't aware. They drunk up and went off elsewhere. But they commented on they weren't aware of it, and actually commented on how well the police officers had dealt with it. So I think it's a tool to have in the kit if something is there. And I think if it's not in your ward, I think it's worth just looking into it. It's not quite as bad as it first appears, because I thought it was once upon a time. But having seen both sides of it, I think if it's handled correctly, it's very useful to have.
Can I just say in relation to that, and one of the reasons we're also looking at the borough-wide consultation is we are receiving complaints from residents in other parts of the borough, which does indicate the problem is not confined to those 5 wards alone, which is why we're looking at going to a further consultation exercise later in the year.
Yeah, I think there's nothing worse if you've got a group of youngsters drinking cider, in the park, backing onto your house. You want, there comes a time when you're trying to put your kids to bed where you want them moved on, and that's a good reason to ask them to go home. You shouldn't be drinking here, so it can be useful. Any other questions? Martin.
Yeah, I'd just obviously like to say in terms of PSPO orders, I think they are incredibly important. I obviously know the first time we introduced one was back in Wimbledon Town Centre. I think when I was chair of licensing around 2005. So there's obviously a long time ago. Certainly from a Pollard's Hill perspective, Pollard's Hill has obviously been excluded from that, and obviously we would like to have PSPO borough-wide. We obviously understand, obviously the evidential base has to be there. Clearly there is issues. It's regretful that obviously the challenges were made more extensive than they used to be, whereby we could have the previous controlled drinking zone borough-wide. But certainly from my perspective, I think it would be incredibly useful. And obviously I know as well, there are some issues within Wimbledon Town Centre as well, obviously given that there is a number of premises there as well. And it's just obviously one in a suite of tools in order to tackle antisocial behaviour. Yeah, and as we are aware, it was introduced in Mitcham because there was widespread concern amongst local residents about street drinking and antisocial behaviour, causing a real problem to the detriment of the local community. So obviously I'd welcome this report. I hope that we are in a position to obviously go further in extending to Pollard's Hill and borough-wide. But yeah, I think a lot of good progress has been made. Obviously, we hope to see further progress being made going forward. But I'd also as well like to thank you for all the work that has been undertaken on this. Thank you.
Nick.
Statement really. I'd just like to endorse Councillor Walton and his comments. I do think it's a tool that we should have at our disposal, and I also welcome the report.
Stuart.
Thank you. Just 2 questions. I think actually kind of going back to what I was we were talking about before. Just on our relationship with Kingdom officers, you mentioned that one of the things they do is when they go out to enforce in certain areas, they use as a priority, referrals to or handing out leaflets to those people rather than issuing fines. Just from my understanding of our relationship with Kingdom, I would have thought their priority would be handing out fines rather than issuing leaflets and things like that. So just help me understand how that relationship works, so they actually do that. And the second thing was just if you have any stats on kind of the number of fines that have been issued in these areas. And it'd be great if there was information, particularly how that broke down in particular PSPO areas and where the hotspots are.
So in the last financial year, admittedly, there hasn't been many, because it's become apparent, full transparency, that there wasn't a lot of enforcement going on previously by the Kingdom officers. So there were 6 FBNs issued in the last financial year. In 2022, so far, there's been 2 FBNs issued. So picking up on that issue, what we've done is tasked the Kingdom officers over the past few weeks to attend Mitcham Town Centre, 2 of them on a daily basis. So last week, for instance, between the 30th of August and the 2nd of September, they were out each day in the town centre. They engaged with 21 street drinkers. And in addition, they handed out 16 leaflets to residents explaining what the PSPO was. And apparently the feedback from residents has been very good. There's plans for more leafleting to be done in the town centre, in addition to those Kingdom officers attending on a daily basis. As Alan said, the enforcement is sort of the last option in terms of the PSPO. The main focus of it will be, because we recognise that the street drinkers are vulnerable people. So there is that. It's been explained to the Kingdom officers that they do need to offer them and liaise with them and engage the support information before going to the step of issuing an FPN.
Agatha.
Can I just add to that? We don't have direct control over Kingdom officers, and you're right, they have in the main been focusing on fines, mainly around littering. But part of their responsibility is to enforce the PSPO. And as I mentioned right earlier, we've reviewed and we will be continuing to review our locations board tasking process. And very much part of that will be the PSPO and making sure that where we get complaints, we will respond, and Kingdom officers will be deployed and will be patrolling and will be engaging, and where it's necessary, enforcing.
Thanks for that. I was going to say they have been enforcing, but only on litter, not the drinking. People are drinking, they don't enforce. If they drop a cigarette, they will give them a ticket. So they've got to get their act together. But they are about, I do see them about, but they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I did want to concur what Councillor Wilton said about the PSPO, and I'm looking forward to it going around, and thank you for your hard work, because I think it should be borough-wide. And, you know, just carry on the good work, and let's hope we get things going. Thanks.
No. Okay, well, thank you, Alan, Casey, for that. Let's move on to item 7, Scrutiny Annual Report. I hope members have had a chance to read it. Are there any questions, queries? In fact, at this point of the proceedings, I'll thank you, Chief Superintendent. The rest of you, if you would like to, you're welcome to stay, obviously, but I'm sure you would rather go home.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see everyone again.
Thank you. Good night. Okay. No questions?
What's the audience for this? What's the audience for this report? Is it the public report? Because it doesn't look like the sort of report that we'd want for ourselves. It's a bit of a cartoon, isn't it? Or, you know, it's a bit kind of very light.
Yes, we have streamlined it. We have condensed it somewhat. It used to be 30-something pages. And so we have attempted to make it a bit more accessible and digestible, particularly for the public arena.
They didn't want 30 pages.
No, I'm not suggesting we go back to 30 pages. It's just that it paints a kind of very rosy picture of Scrutiny, and everyone loves Scrutiny, doing such a good job, improving things so much. It just seems a little bit superficial.
May I ask what you'd like to see on it next year?
I don't know, maybe something just more like in a table or something for us, perhaps not necessarily for public consumption, but just like a table of, you know, actual things that have changed as a result of Scrutiny.
Councillor Wilton.
Thank you. Obviously, as a member who has recently joined Scrutiny, I think the work of Scrutiny has been very useful to the council's work over the past few years. I think in terms of the layout of the report, yeah, I'm more than happy with it. I think it has been presented in a professional manner. And I recognise that scrutiny does have a vital role to play in terms of the working of the council, but also as well, looking at this report, it does give information about successes that have been undertaken, but also as well, the work of each panel here. And of course, we should always, as anybody, look for ways of improving ourselves. We have a member survey, obviously 20% responded. Hopefully it will be more in terms of the next year, but that feedback helps make scrutiny more effective. And I'd also like to take this opportunity of obviously paying tribute to the work of your predecessor, Councillor Southgate, as chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. 16 years is an incredibly long period to chair a commission, but obviously he had built up scrutiny over that time period, and made it, quite effective in terms of the work that it's undertaken. But clearly, it's a hard act to follow for you, Chair. But I think we should give that rightful recognition of what we have achieved over the past number of years in terms of scrutiny. And I think we saw that tonight. I think obviously no scrutiny of the borough commander in terms of the number of questions we were asking as a commission. So I'd like to obviously place that on record, my thanks.
Thanks, Martin. I think you made a very valid point. I was going to mention the work of my predecessor, Peter Southgate, as chair of scrutiny for 16 years. Certainly my 8 years as a councillor, watching it every year was interesting, and yes, a hard act to follow, but I will do my best. But there we are. Thank you. Billy, did you have your hand up? Right, sorry. Any other questions? Mike?
Was just a comment really, that I think that reports like this evolve over time, and there's change that was brought about because of feedback that happens in the past. I think that we need to be cautious about suggesting, as I don't want to be disrespectful, but newcomers to the, and I'm a newcomer to the scrutiny, I think that we have to go with the flow and develop things over time rather than just say boldly, because there's a lot of work that's gone into this, in putting this into this concise form. So I think that if we want to evolve it in a different way in the future, we give feedback, not in a public forum like this, but maybe give some ideas or ask questions about how it was put in that format and the like. So I applaud it. I think it's really eye-catching. I think it covers the points that we want to get across, and there's no point in having something that people don't read. So we've evolved it to this. Let's see how it goes, what the feedback is, and let's take it further if we want to change it more.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? No? Right. Let's move on to item 8, the member survey. Let me just ask items. You read it? Anything anyone wants to raise on that? Just note it. Okay, I think John again.
Sorry, tell me when my quota's up. I just wondered if anyone's got any ideas how to get above 20%, because that really makes it fairly, it suggests that only people fairly closely involved in the process have an opinion about it.
Well, I was going to say that we were looking, there were people coming off the council at the time the information was being gathered, leaving the council. It's up to us to make sure that we get a higher response rate next year, because we're the new council. So I think that we just need to engage, and I've been guilty in the past of not responding necessarily. I wasn't on scrutiny last year, but we need to push it with our colleagues.
I have to say, agreeing with Mike, the effort that went in by the previous chair of scrutiny, Peter Southgate, the effort at every council meeting, the emails that came out from Rosie, encouraging, reminding, he stood up at council meetings and waved it. They've been photocopies for people to fill in during the meeting after it, standing there collecting them. It's surprising that's all that replied, but the effort was there. But I think, as Mike said, a lot of people were stepping down. There were changes. It's up to us to try and make it better next year. Jill.
Purely an observation, Chair. sometimes it's worth looking at the glass half full rather than half empty. And also collective responsibility aside, sometimes personal responsibility in encouraging our fellow colleagues to participate, not always placing all the responsibility on one person.
I think we all have a duty on scrutiny panels and as members, and I went without tempting fate. I'm confident we can probably improve on that next year. So I will remind you all to remind your fellow councillors nearer the time. Right, item 9, overview and scrutiny, the working group feedback on Chas. Now, Louise, is this, are we, is
Yes,
this going to
you
be
need
private?
to resolve to move into exempt session. If you're going to do that, going to discuss it.
Okay, should we go off?
You need to close down the
Okay, thank you for anyone viewing online, joining us on YouTube. I'm afraid this part of the meeting is